If you're involved in any aspect of tribal-based transportation, then you're already aware of the transportation challenges facing Indian communities. And likewise, you're probably all too familiar with the shortages of resources, information, and community input needed to address those challenges. That's where the tools and techniques of transportation planning become very useful. Join me now as we listen to what experienced transportation planners have to say about setting and achieving transportation goals that will ultimately improve the quality of life for the residents of your community. Today's transportation systems are complex and costly, requiring an intricate collaboration between many overlapping governmental jurisdictions, each with its own set of priorities and procedures. Every community is unique, and one cookie-cutter approach to transportation planning will not sufficiently address the needs of every reservation. No longer is the process a simple matter of just building roads and bridges. Now projects must consider a multitude of factors including safety, the environment, economic development, fiscal responsibility, and the future needs of growing and aging populations.
Development and publication of a plan is one of the strongest things that a tribe can do to preserve the concept of sovereignty, self-governance, and self-determination.
Long-range transportation plans, or LRTPs, project 20 years or more into the future and provide a positive shared vision of what your community's transportation system could be like.
Planning in itself is a combination of communication, cooperation, and coordination. And the most significant value to a transportation plan is that it is as comprehensive a communication device or tool that you can come up with to express your needs or express even your plans to another agency. And at the same time, if you fail to plan, every agency in the world will be happy to do it for you, but then after a while it's no longer your reservation.
To make the best transportation choices, planners must work with the public and other interested groups who can help paint a picture of future needs to improve safety, access, and mobility.
There's the formal stakeholders that are involved. We have permitting agencies that are involved with the permit process if there's water involved. There's also the landowners and adjacent landowners. There's the land managers, either federal or tribal, that are in that area. Private landowners are also the stakeholders of our project.
For many professionals in the transportation field, public consultation is perhaps the single most important component of transportation planning. In tribal communities, public consultation means getting input from tribal members and tribal decision makers at all levels, as well as members of the general public, and reporting back to them regularly. Public consultation should take place throughout the entire planning process and helps to identify and address safety, access, and mobility issues.
We hold public meetings, open house type meetings. We'll go to meetings that are being held by community groups to put on presentations about the project. So outreach is very important. Trying to identify all the stakeholders is a key part of what we do.
You see a lot of creative techniques, from bringing the people in and having like a spaghetti cook-off, or a chili cook-off, or food. Food seems to really bring people in, and that's a classic. The others are, going out to certain functions and making, where are the people, where's your target audience going to be, and maybe you just go out there, have somebody that they know and respect appear, speak to them about, tie it in, and then say, for more information, go and talk to the planners over at the table here. We have them here today, and they know all the facts, and they have some visual materials that you can look at. And so that's a really good tool.
Important documents produced during the project planning phases include project alternatives and project scoping reports. These documents provide the foundation on which a successful transportation improvement program, known as a TIP, can be based. Don't forget that a critical part of a long-range transportation plan is the identification of potential funding sources to implement your projects. Information is a foundational element of all transportation planning, but many reservations lack basic transportation data. So data collection about your community and existing transportation conditions must be conducted early in the process.
Really the key is to start with layers of information. The idea in my mind would be to get real friendly with the GIS, Graphic Information System Shop. What maps of the road system, what maps of assets like timber or other items do they have spatially? The idea of how do those systems relate to each other in space. There may be things on those in that GIS department that are very sensitive, like traditional cultural places, that may need to be managed yet at the same time never disclosed. So in order to get an understanding of that, you need to have that spatial relationship.
As part of a comprehensive transportation plan, a long-range transportation plan, or that's the proper terminology in today's rule, you evaluate what your needs are going to be. You get them into the plan, and then you get those surface routes at least into the Indian Reservation Roads System inventory, which is no easy task. And then you develop a transportation improvement plan, which hopefully includes that series of projects for as far ahead as you can see. And then you go about trying to acquire funding for it.
Key elements of basic data collection on reservations should include the demographics of the community. The planning process requires existing housing and employment information be summarized and mapped for the entire planning area. The planner also needs to geospatially identify where future developments will be located. The demographic information most critical for transportation planning include 1. The number and location of family dwelling units, which is used to develop the total amount of vehicle trips produced, more commonly described as trips generated, and the number and location of employees summarized by retail and other employment. Employment location determines where those vehicle trips are attracted.
Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data, you're not gonna come up with the right answer and a good answer for the transportation that's needed. So very early on, we try to get out and do good data collection. And technical data from a transportation standpoint includes traffic counts, how many vehicles go up and down and use the roadway, the types of vehicles that use the roadway.
Tribal transportation projects usually take into account more of the social and cultural needs of the society than what a general population project would take in. It's usually more attuned to cultural, historic preservation, more in tune with the natural environment than a lot of the local jurisdictions' highways.
Transportation planning looks for ways to solve current problems and prevent future ones. When thinking about long-range plans for your community's future, you will need to establish goals and priorities based on the input you've gathered from the community.
Well, really the key to developing the list of projects is for the community, whichever one is developing the list, to set their goals. And so if we took a tribe, their goal may be very heavy into pedestrians or bike paths. They may have a village or community center that they need to have accessed well. They may have other goals like commodities, like for example, tribe or even land management agency might have a lot of timber or other assets they need to access. So the key first is to say, what am I trying to move? And of course, inevitably, it's a combination of things. It's never just one. One key in transportation planning is to get an idea of your priorities. I think that's the biggest key. When one idea is to start is you just get a wish list of all your ideas, but almost in every situation, almost anywhere you go, we cannot fund, nobody can fund every item on that list. So we need to make a priority, and that's really key for a community, a tribe, for anyone to make that priority.
Another step that should be performed early in the process is a needs analysis. This step gives you a clear idea of existing conditions that helps direct you to where you want to be.
One reason for transportation planning, or even management systems, any of the data gathering that you've done, is to make sure that you have a valid purpose and need of the project, something that can stand the test of the environmental concerns that are just commonplace in today's, really everywhere in today's world of getting a project done.
And I always tell the tribes to go back to read their treaties so that they understand and keep in mind what their ancestors were trying to preserve for them. So that would tie back to your health and welfare, to your educational needs, to your usual and accustomed hunting and gathering sites. Anything that relates to those things within your treaty is going to be able to fall back into justifying why you need these roads, why you need these facilities.
So having a valid purpose and need is really key to those next steps. Planning process can help with that to make sure that we are having a goal that's wise enough of the expenditure of those resources, and wise enough that if there are any impacts, that those can be addressed and worked on based against the value of what that project would provide.
More often than not, stakeholders and participants will express concepts and concerns that are at odds with one another. In these cases, you must learn how to balance the needs of conflicting groups and seek workable solutions.
People often wonder, how do you balance between transportation needs and the cultural resources of a community? And cultural resources might include the environment, they might be a burial ground, there might be other significant areas that the tribe or other communities care for, and maybe it's even something that a lot of people aren't even aware of. However, what we need to do as transportation planners is to assess as much of the key data information. We need to get a hold of the resource agencies, we need to talk to the community, the public, and we need to then translate that into information that the public as a whole can look at, the decision makers and the community members, so that they can look at alternative A, B, and C and say, well, these are the costs and the benefits of this alternative versus another. And that's the job of a transportation planner, is to look at all those alternatives, give the public the information so that reasonable decisions can occur.
Identifying funding sources in your transportation improvement program is crucial for implementing your projects. These sources can be public, meaning state, federal, or local funding, or from private sources. Unless you tie a transportation project to reliable sources of funding, your transportation plan is really nothing more than a wish list. Ongoing interaction and cooperation with transportation agencies will keep you abreast of the changing availability of funds.
It's almost like a pie chart. You would say, we've got X amount of one funding type, we've got X amount of another funding type. If we put them all together, we can make a whole pie of funds and get a little more project work done.
Well, there are a lot of programs that are available from the Federal Highway Administration, funding that's available through a lot of various elements of transportation funding packages, the tribal scenic byways, for instance, in tourism development. If you work with the state and you're working on state routes, there are a lot of state routes and county roads that go through or that exist on reservations. And so by working with those partnerships, you can bring IRR money in with maybe some county money and other local money and federal money that comes through the states, or the state funding its own, with state routes.
Our first agency that was involved with our project was the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They gave us the original planning and feasibility study dollars. That helped us identify the problems with the road. It helped us get off of the reservation into Olympia, into Washington, D.C. to help find money, to let the political people know that we have a problem. The total process of funding was a very unique project. We have all of the players putting money and time and skills into this road, not only the Lummi Nation themselves, but Whatcom County, their engineering department, Washington State Department of Transportation, and we worked with the Seattle District, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. All of these agencies had a very strong part in this project. And I think that's where Lummi kind of brought it together with getting all of these major players to the table.
As the elements of a transportation plan begin to come together, environmental studies and archaeological surveys must also be included, and possible impacts in those areas addressed. Once a transportation plan is complete on paper, it is essential to achieve buy-in from the stakeholders who will be affected by the plan, and even more essential to obtain approval from the tribal council or governing body that will ultimately have the power to accept or reject the plan.
Fundamentally, from a political perspective, you really need to have the buy-in of the tribal council members. So it's really important to at least find one champion on the council, and if not more, and provide as much technical expertise as a planner or someone working in the transportation planning area. You need to provide that information, the tools, the data, in a way that the decision makers can understand.
As transportation professionals, we all want to help our people and improve the quality of life for future generations. To do that, we must do all we can to learn and apply transportation planning tools and techniques.
What I always think about is our ancestors and their vision of planning. They thought, 7 generations ahead, and sometimes we get clouded by the hype that's going around, and so I think that's why I go back to reading the treaty and encouraging people to know what it is that they wanted for us, so that we can try to understand that we have to be planners for all the people, not just ourselves.
As you've seen, transportation planning is a complex field, and programs like this one can only scratch the surface. It's up to you to dig deeper and learn more as you continue on your own pathway to planning. The future starts tomorrow. Will you be ready?